Hello and welcome back. This is Barrett from Cypress College. And in this lab today, we're going to cover the AWS Academy Cloud Foundation's Introduction to Amazon EC2. So what is EC2? Well, this is the Elastic Compute Cloud, and you'll rarely actually hear it said with its full name. Everybody just calls it EC2, but you could basically just think of this as virtual machines or very specifically servers in the cloud. So this is what's going to allow businesses to move away from running their own data centers, from having their own servers on premise and hosting things like Linux servers and Windows servers in the cloud. So, and in this lab today, I actually think this IIS web server title is a bit of an error because we're actually deploying an Apache web server. Apache web servers are run on Linux instances, whereas IIS is Windows web server. So just keep that in mind. But topics covered in this lab, we're going to be launching the web server with termination protection enabled. Then we're going to take a look at Cloudwatch monitoring, take a look at the metrics. We'll modify the security group to make sure that we can actually make HTTP requests to that web server. And then we're going to look at resizing. So think about scale. Maybe we want to increase the instance type. Maybe we want to increase the EBS volume, storage size. And then we will look into how we can terminates. But first, we're going to see this termination protection enabled in action, and then we'll go ahead and disable it, and you can see how you could safely terminate. So I'm going to go ahead and move the lab document over to the side, just focus in on the whole console. So of course, first thing we want to do to launch an Ec2 instance, we want to go to the Ec2 section. So you could find it within all of the services, and actually in this case, this is the very first one. So it's listed under Compute EC2. But as I've mentioned before, I usually tend to just search, and then you find EC2 here. So here you could see, I mean, there's a lot of things happening here. I recommend you explore around. That's what these sandboxes are good for. But essentially what we want to do, we could launch the instance straight away from here. You can go to see what's currently running. So there is currently a Bastion host running, but we will go ahead and launch a new instance here. So step one, choose an AMI or Amazon machine image. So as I mentioned in the beginning, so we're going to be launching an Apache web server. So we will want to use the Amazon Linux 2 AMI, and you see that this is free tier eligible. I doubt in these sandbox environments that we could do anything that's anything different than free tier eligible. But just, as you scroll down, you see we have a lot of different distributions that we could choose an AMI for. We have Red Hat, Ubuntu. Here's the Microsoft servers, Debian, etc. And just wanted to point out too, there is also an AWS Marketplace. So this is where companies can create their own custom AMIs. There are community AMIs. So if you wanted to potentially make something custom, you could make that widely available. Oftentimes you can find things that are like distributions that are hardened and more secure to certain standards. So we're not going to be doing this in the lab, but I just thought I would point out these two sections. And then of course, if you wanted to create your own custom AMIs, they would show up right here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Quick Start. We're going to select the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And that's going to take us to step 2 of choose an instance type. So we'll go ahead and leave this on T2 Micro. This is also the free tier eligible. 1 CPU, 1 gig of memory. So it's pretty lightweight, but honestly, for what we're doing in this lab, it's all that's necessary. And that's a part of being a cloud architect is right sizing, knowing what size you need for which use case, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit next to configure instance details. And I believe, so we're going to want to change the network to lab VPC. So if you remember from the last lab, we actually created this lab VPC. In this case, it was automatically created for us. Whenever these labs are spun up, they basically run a CloudFormation script. So that was just kind of pre-built in. So we'll go ahead and select that. Let's go ahead and put this in a public subnet. We can leave it on public subnet too. And you could see that we have two different availability zones available, USEs 1A, USEs 1B. So we could even potentially deploy two different instances in each availability zone, and that would give us what's called high availability. In the event that maybe one server goes down in one availability zone, we could use a load balancer and switch over to the other instance. But for this, let's just go ahead and select public subnet 2. The auto assign public IP, that's good, that's enabled. We will want a public IP address assigned. And if we go down to the bottom, we will want to look at the user data and input a script. And I'm going to go ahead and bring the script over here so we just talk about that briefly. This one is fairly simple. Because we're running on a Linux server, it uses the bash shell or born again shell. So here the script is basically signifying, okay, this is a bash script, and we're running the yum command to install the web server. And yum is essentially the package manager for installing software or tools in the CentOS Linux operating system. And then here we're just starting the web server. And now, if you remember in the previous lab, we did a very similar script. And what we did, we actually downloaded the website files, and then we moved them into var www HTML folder, which this is the location that the web server is going to look at to load the website. But essentially what we're doing here is we're running an echo command, and we're echoing out this text, which is very, very simple HTML code. It's basically going to display the text hello from your web server. And this little command here, the greater than symbol, this is redirecting this text into this file that's located in the web server folder. So hopefully that makes sense. And that breakdown kind of helps you understand, some basic scripting concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'll move this back over. And so this is the important part. You just want to copy and paste that right into the user data. And you don't have to worry about these spaces that get placed in. You could get rid of them too. But the most important part is that none of the syntax changes, that none of the, spaces, like if I accidentally have a space there, it would break this code. It would not, the web server would definitely not load up properly because the HTML code would be a bit off. But as long as you just copy and paste that right in, you should be good. And we'll go ahead and go to next, add storage. We're going to leave this as a default, 8 gigs for the EBS volume. Let's go to add tags. Always a good idea to tag your machines. You have to imagine that you'll be, working with coworkers. They need to be able to quickly know what various boxes are. If you're making security groups, things like that, you want to describe what it is. Okay, and speaking of security groups, we're going to go ahead and add the security group name here. We'll call it Web Server Security Group. And the description will say security group for my web server. There we go. And it's nice to see in the lab walkthrough that it actually calls out that leaving SSH port 22 open to the world. So remember, when you see these quad zeros with a /0 CIDR block, this is basically another word for the internet. So it's saying the source can come from anywhere on the internet. Best practice is, and remember port 22 for SSH, this is how you remotely administer Linux machines. So best practice would be for me to just come here and put in my very specific IP address and then followed by a /32. So this /32 CIDR block is what's going to fix that IP address to only that one. So that is best practice. In this lab, though, we're not going to remote in at all. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and exit out. And that would be the best thing to do, too, if you know that you're not going to remotely administer the box. You just don't even want to have the ability for all people on the internet to attempt to hit that box on port 22. So, all right, so let's review and launch. We have the review page. And now when we hit launch, it's going to ask us to either select an existing key pair or create a new key pair. Now, once again, this is all related to if we want to remotely connect to it, which we're not going to do. But in the event you did want to, and this could be a challenge if you want to go a step further in this lab, you could create a new key pair, give it any name you want. You can call it AWS Lab 1, whatever. You would download that key pair, and then if you're on Windows, you could look up how to connect using a tool called Putty, Putty. If you are on Mac or Linux, you could look up online how to connect just using your terminal, straight from the command line. So feel free to try that out and give yourself a little bit of a challenge. We are going to talk about that later on in the course, but I just figured I'd give you that option to kind of, if you're curious. But in this particular instance, we're going to proceed without a key pair. And then here is Amazon warning us, without a key pair, you cannot remotely connect to this instance. So that's okay. We're gonna go ahead and launch without. All right, so your instance is now launching. If we go to view instances, you can see that we're in a current pending state, right? Okay, and now we are in a running state. That didn't take very long. So now that completes task one. We've launched the instance. We installed that very basic web server and that one-line HTML file, which serves as our website. But now let's take a look at monitoring options. So if we come down here, you can see that the web server is checked here. If I uncheck it, that goes away. We check it here, we get this information down below. So if we go down to status check, this is always a good, exactly as it says, a status check. We see that it's running, instance status checks running. Now, if we go to monitoring, this is where we will see Cloudwatch metrics, performance metrics. Obviously, we just launched this, so you're not going to really see much here. But in the event, you have machines that have been running for weeks and weeks, you can get very detailed performance metrics here. And we could check out system logs from basically all of the installation that happened pertaining to that user script that we added into our Ec2 instance. So if we come up to actions, go to monitor and troubleshoot, go to get system log. This is going to pull up everything that happened at the initial boot and provisioning of this Ec2 instance. So if we scroll up a little bit, we should be able to see, yeah, okay, so here is the HTTPD installation or HTTP daemon or web server, right? So this is Apache, and you can see here that it also knew to install particular dependencies that were needed for this service. Okay, and then also, if we come back to actions, whoops, I need to select the web server. There we go. Come back to actions, monitor, and troubleshooting. We could also get a very quick instance screenshot. So here we could see this is basically, it's running in the background. The web server has started, right? Because we included that in that user data script. But this was basically just waiting for somebody to potentially log in. This would be the screen we would get if we logged in using those SSH keys, for example. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel. And moving on to task 3. So the web server is running. If I scroll over, we have a public IP. So let's see if we can connect to it. Whoops, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and open a new tab. Let's see if we could visit our web server. And it's looking like we're not able to hit it right now. So if we go back here, remember, we still need to update our security group. So we did create the security group. We gave it a name. We gave it a description. We deleted SSH as an inbound source. But remember, we didn't add anything. So in order for us to be able to connect via HTTP to connect to a web server, which is over port 80, we need to go into the security section. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. I'm on the web server itself. You can come down to security here, and we can see which security group is related here. So, and you can see that's the web server security group. So I can click into the security group here. Another way is if you came to the left-hand side here under network and security, just go to the security group section, which I'll show you here. That loads all of the security groups that you currently have in your current VP or in your current region. Okay, so we're going to work with the web server security group. So I'm going to click into that. And so as you can see, inbound rules are completely blank right now. Outbound rules were good because we are allowing all traffic to go out to quad zeros with a CIDR block of 0, which is the internet, right? So if we go back to inbound rules, we just want to edit. We're going to go ahead and add a rule. And for this lab, we're dealing only with HTTP, even though HTTPS is best practice because it's encrypted, it's HTTP secure. And if you see when I select that, that happens on port 443. But for the sake of simplicity in this lab, we're going to use HTTP, which is port 80. But it's always good to remember this is technically unsecure. It's plain text. So let's say, for instance, you actually come across a bank that allows you to use HTTP, which is pretty unlikely these days. But say you did, and you're in a Starbucks and you were entering in your password using only HTTP. If there was a threat actor, a malicious hacker in there that was sniffing the network and listening in on communications, it is very, very simple for them to obtain your login and password because it's unencrypted. So that is why we use HTTPS. But anyways, I digress. Here we are going to want to accept traffic from everywhere on the internet because this is a web server. We want everyone to be able to access it. So we will select the quad zeros. And here you can see that that sets it as anywhere for IPv4. And for description, you know, we could say allow all inbound HTTP traffic. Okay, so let's go ahead and save those rules. And now we remember that this is attached. If we go back to instances, scroll over, you see the web security group is attached to that. So if we go ahead and attempt to connect again, we should have much better luck, and there we go. So remember that script, that one line, that echo hello from your web server, we redirected that into the index HTML file. That is exactly this. So we are loading that HTML file that we created using the user data script when we provisioned that Ec2 instance. All right, so congratulations, your first working web server. Now let's take a look at potentially resizing this. Let's say, hey, we're the web server is really growing. We need more. We need more CPU power. We need more space on the hard drive. So I want to be able to resize this. So in order to do any type of resizing, you do need to stop your server first. So with that selected, we're going to choose instance state. We're going to stop the instance. Okay, and you see that that is in a current stopping state. It shouldn't take too long to completely, power down. Now I'll just go ahead and refresh. Still stopping. I'll give it a moment. All right, and there we go. So we are completely stopped. So it's fairly simple to do resizing, and this is the beauty of the AWS cloud, because if you think about back in the day and on premises, you needed to maybe install a new hard drive. You needed to maybe just completely change out the server, right? So you needed to provision a new one. You had to wait for it to come in. You had to have someone IT to take, hours to take out the other one, put in the new one. But here, all we had to do was stop this. We come up to actions and we go to instance settings. And now we just want to change the instance type. So this is where we want more CPU. We want more better performance, right? So we could change from T2 micro, and let's go ahead and change this to T2 small. And in this case, it's actually giving us a bit more memory than a T2 micro. So I'm going to go ahead and press apply. You could see that changed immediately. And now let's say we want to resize the EBS volume, the storage. So here we would come over to volumes. And we see the volume that is attached to the web server here. So we'll want to go ahead and select that. We'll come to actions and we're going to modify that volume. And let's go ahead and just up this 2 more gigabytes. We're going to change it to 10. And we'll press modify. Are you sure you want to modify? Yes, I do. Okay, succeeded. And now if we refresh, we can see that that is now set to 10 gigs. Now let's go back over to instances and let's go ahead and restart this web server. So we'll click on that, go to instance state. We're going to go ahead and start the instance. We refresh, we see that it's currently pending. I'll pause for a moment while it restarts. All right, and we are back, we're running. Although I guess it is still initializing, but that actually doesn't matter because we're not going to be accessing it at all. But so essentially the last part of this lab, let's see if we can terminate this. So we have the web server selected. If we come to instance state, terminate instance, it's just asking on an EBS backed instance. The default action is for the root EBS volume to be deleted when the instance is terminated. Storage on any of those drives will be lost. So that's good to always remember. But yes, let's go ahead and attempt to terminate this. And so I just realized that I forgot to enable termination protection in the beginning of this lab. So if you're following along with me and you also forgot, don't worry, it's not going to take off any points or anything in the AWS Academy lab. But I do want to show that to you again, because I shouldn't have been able to just instantly terminate that like I was able to. But let's pretend like we're launching another EC2 instance. So we go to Launch Instances, choose the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. We'll choose T2 Micro. And now this is the part that I kind of glazed over. So remember, we set our lab VPC. We were talking about the different subnets, having the high availability between two availability zones, had a public IP. Now, the next part right here was the important part, enable termination protection. So with that checked, when I went to terminate that just now, it should have given a warning. And then essentially what we would have had to do is come into here, actions, instance settings, and you could change the termination protection settings. And then here I could either enable it or disable it as I see fit. So sorry about that confusion. Realized that I just kind of glazed over that part, but didn't want to really go back and completely redo the lab for that. So, but and with that, that brings us to the lab completion. So good job. I hope everybody learned a lot about EC2 in this lab. And so just a overview, let me go back to the topics covered. We launched the web server. We forgot termination protection enabled, but we just went over that now. And within that web server, we had that user data script. So that script automatically installed Apache web server, created a very, very simple one-line HTML website. We then looked at Cloudwatch Metrics, how we can monitor that instance for performance. We modified our security group. We gave it a name, gave it a description. We deleted the SSH inbound rules. We eventually added port 80 inbound on all for HTTP access. We then looked at resizing. We resized to a completely different EC2 instance type. We went from T2 micro to T2 small, doubling the RAM. And then we also upped the EBS volume by 2 gigabytes. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.